The stars had never been kind to humanity, but humanity had learned to be kind to the stars anyway for 300 years. Human soldiers bled on worlds they would never call home, and human scientists cured plagues that would never threaten Earth. And human engineers built wonders that alien hands would claim as their own. The Galactic Concord was a union of 4,000 species, each one older than humanity, each one certain of its own superiority, and each one quietly grateful that the young aggressive apes from the small blue world were willing to do the dying for them. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood at the viewport of the diplomatic station orbiting the Concord capital world, and she watched the memorial lights flickering in the darkness of space. Each light represented a human ship lost in the Drath incursion, and there were 2,000 of them floating out there like frozen tears. 2 million human soldiers had died in that war, and not a single one of those soldiers had been defending Earth. The Drath had threatened 12 alien homeworlds, and humanity had answered the call for help as they always did. And now those 12 worlds celebrated their survival, while human colonies burned and human children went hungry. Ambassador Tanaka, a smooth voice said behind her, "The assembly is ready for you now." She turned to face her aide, a young man named Marcus Chun, whose grandfather had died fighting the Velthari swarm 30 years ago. "How do they seem?" she asked. Marcus hesitated before answering. "Bored, Ambassador." "They seem bored." Yuki nodded slowly because she had expected nothing less. The assembly chamber was a vast dome of crystalline walls and floating platforms, where representatives of thousands of species gathered to decide the fate of the galaxy. When Yuki walked to the central speaking platform, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, and most of those eyes held nothing but impatience. Grand Arbiter Valsarath presided over the assembly from his elevated throne, his 6 arms folded across his chitinous chest, his compound eyes reflecting the light of a dozen suns. "The human ambassador may speak," he announced in a tone that suggested he had better things to do. Yuki activated her translation implant and began. "Honored members of the Galactic Concord, I come before you today to request humanitarian aid for the human colonies damaged in the Drath incursion." A ripple of whispers moved through the chamber, and Yuki heard fragments of conversation in 100 languages. 17 of our colony worlds suffered severe damage, she continued, and over 40 million human civilians are without adequate food, shelter, or medical care. She projected images into the air above her. Children with hollow eyes standing in the ruins of their homes, hospitals overflowing with the wounded, farmland scorched black by Drath plasma weapons. "We sacrifice greatly to protect this galaxy," Yuki said, "and we ask only for help in healing our wounds." The chamber fell silent for a long moment. Then Grand Arbiter Valsarath leaned forward and spoke. "The Concord acknowledges the contribution of human forces in the recent conflict. However, the Treasury has been strained by the war effort, and resources must be allocated carefully." "We are not asking for charity," Yuki replied, keeping her voice steady. "We are asking for the same aid that was provided to the Deshan Compact after the Nexus Mind incident, and the same aid that was provided to the Kethra Dominion after the stellar collapse of their 4th colony. Those situations were different," Valsarath said dismissively. "How were they different?" The Grand Arbiter's compound eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. "The Deshans and the Kethra required assistance because they are not naturally suited to hardship, but humans are survivors by nature, and your species has proven remarkably capable of recovering from disaster without external support." Yuki felt her hands tremble slightly at her sides. "Are you saying that because we are strong, we deserve no help?" "I am saying that the Concord must prioritize its resources," Valsarath replied, "and the Assembly will now vote on the human request for aid." The vote took less than a minute. 3,700 Species voted against providing aid. 212 voted in favor. 88 abstained. Yuki stood motionless on the platform as the numbers appeared in the air before her, and she heard the whispers starting again, the casual dismissal of human suffering, the quiet jokes about emotional apes and their theatrical displays of grief. The motion fails, Velsorath announced. The assembly thanks the human ambassador for her presentation. And this session is now concluded. Representatives began filing out of the chamber, already discussing other matters. Already forgetting the images of starving children and burning cities, Yuki remained on the platform until the chamber was nearly empty. Marcus approached her carefully. Ambassador, what do we do now? She looked at him for a long moment. This young man, whose family had given so much to a galaxy that gave nothing in return. And she made a decision that had been building inside her for years. Send a message to Earth, she said quietly. One word only. What word? Yuki turned away from the empty chamber and walked toward the exit. And her voice was calm and cold and final when she spoke. Enough. The message traveled across 1,000 light years in an instant, and when it reached Earth, the leaders of the United Human Confederacy gathered in the ancient city of Geneva to discuss its. Meaning President James Okonkwo read the single word on his screen, and he looked around the table at the tired faces of humanity's elected representatives. 300 years, he said softly. 300 years of bleeding for them, dying for them, saving them from every threat they could not face alone. And this is how they repay us. Defense Minister Sarah Cohen spoke next. Our military is exhausted. Our colonies are damaged. Our economy is strained. And they tell us we do not deserve help because we are too good at surviving. What are options? Okonkwo asked. We could continue as we have, said Foreign Minister Liu Wei. We could keep giving and sacrificing and hoping that someday they will see us as equals. That will never happen. Cohen said bitterly. I have read the intelligence reports, and I have seen what they really think of us. They call us useful savages. Attack dogs to be pointed at their enemies, and then kennelled when the fighting is done. The room fell silent finally. An old woman at the end of the table spoke up, and her name was Admiral Chan Weilin, the hero of the HFY War, the most decorated officer in human history. There is another option, she said. We could simply stop. Stop fighting? Okonkwo asked. Stop everything, Weilin replied. Stop trading with them. Stop protecting them. Stop answering their calls for help. Stop pretending that we need their approval to exist. We could go home and close the door behind us. They would never allow it, Liu Wei protested. The Concord depends on us too much. Admiral Weilin smiled. And it was not a kind smile. That is precisely the point. Let them discover just how much they depend on us. Let them learn what the galaxy looks like without humanity holding it together. President Okonkwo considered her words for a long time. Then, he made the decision that would change everything. Begin the withdrawal, he said. Bring our people home, all of them, and when the last human ship crosses our borders, seal them shut. The order went out that very night, and the stars watched in silence as humanity began to walk away. The withdrawal began quietly, without fanfare or announcement, without threats or ultimatums, without any of the dramatic gestures that aliens had come to expect from the emotional humans. One day the human ambassador on the Theshan homeworld simply packed her belongings and boarded a transport ship. And when the Theshan government asked where she was going, she smiled politely and said she was going home. The next day, the human peacekeeping force on the Kethra border received orders to return to human space. And when the Kethra demanded an explanation, the human commander simply shrugged and said his tour of duty was over within a week. Human diplomats were leaving their posts across the galaxy. Human merchant ships were rerouting away from alien ports. And human military vessels were streaming back toward the borders of human. Space Grand Arbiter Vale Sorath received the reports with growing irritation. What game are they playing? He demanded of his advisors, his chief intelligence officer, a pale creature with too many eyes named Kelvorax. Studied the data streams carefully. It appears they are withdrawing from all non-essential engagements, Kelvorax said. Their ambassador recalls number in the hundreds. Their trade routes are being redirected. Their military forces are pulling back from every contested zone. They are throwing a tantrum, Valsorath decided. They are upset about the aid vote, and they are trying to frighten us into changing our decision. Perhaps, Kalvorak said carefully. But Grand Arbiter, the scale of this withdrawal is concerning. They are not simply reducing their presence. They are eliminating it entirely. Valsorath waved a dismissive arm. Let them sulk in their little corner of space. They will return when their pride has healed. They always do. Humans cannot resist the urge to help. It is in their nature. But weeks passed, and the humans did not return. The first sign of real trouble came from the Merchant Guild, whose representatives arrived at the Concord capital in a state of barely controlled panic. The human warp gates are shutting down. The guildmaster announced to the assembly. Zarath frowned. Explain. The humans built 60% of the galaxy's warp gate network, the guildmaster said. They constructed the gates. They maintain the gates. They control the gate protocols. And now they are turning them off one by one. A murmur of concern rippled through the assembly. They cannot do that, but protested the Veshan representative. Those gates are vital to galactic commerce. The gates are human property, the guildmaster replied grimly. They built them with human resources and human labor. They have every legal right to deactivate them. Then we will demand they reactivate them. Valsorath declared. We have tried, the guildmaster said. Every message to human space goes unanswered. Every ship that approaches the human border is turned away by automated defense platforms. They are not responding to anyone. Valsorath felt the first cold touch of doubt in his heart. But he pushed it aside. This is a negotiating tactic, he insisted. They want us to offer them something. Better trade terms, perhaps, or a seat on the Security Council. Send them a message offering to discuss their concerns. The message was sent. No response came a month later. The last human warp gate went dark, and trade routes that had connected thousands of worlds suddenly became impossible. Journeys of decades instead of days. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Worlds that had relied on human agricultural shipments faced food shortages. Factories that had depended on human-manufactured components ground to a halt. Hospitals that had stockpiled human medical supplies watched those supplies dwindle with no hope of replacement. And still the humans said nothing, Ambassador. Yuki Tanaka watched the chaos unfold from her new home on Earth. In a small apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean that had been in her family for generations, she felt no satisfaction in the suffering of the aliens, who had dismissed her pleas for help. But she felt no guilt either. Marcus Chen visited her often, bringing news from the stars. The Veshans are rationing food, he reported one evening. The Kethra are fighting among themselves over the remaining trade routes. The Merchant Guild has collapsed. And the Concord is holding emergency sessions every day. And the humans? Yuki asked. Marcus smiled. We are fine. Better than fine, actually. Without the burden of protecting everyone else, our economy is booming. Our scientists are making breakthroughs every week. Our colonies are rebuilding faster than anyone predicted. Yuki nodded slowly. It is strange, is it not? For 300 years we believed we needed them. We thought their approval gave us value. We measured our worth by how useful we were to the Concord. And now? Now we are learning that we were the ones holding everything together, not them. They needed us far more than we ever needed them. Marcus hesitated before asking his next question. Ambassador, what happens when the real threats return? The Valkyrie swarm is still out there. The Nexus mine may have survived. The Drath are already rebuilding their forces. Yuki turned to look out at the ocean, at the waves that have been crashing against Earth's shores for billions of years before any alien had looked down on her world. That is not our problem anymore, she said quietly. We gave them 300 years of our blood and our tears and our children's lives. And they gave us nothing but contempt in return. Let them face the darkness alone. Let them learn what we protected them from. And if they cannot survive without us, then perhaps they should have treated us better when they had the chance. The first year of human isolation passed, and the galaxy grew. Darker pirate fleets that had once feared human intervention grew bold and began raiding shipping lanes. Slavers who had hidden from human justice emerged from the shadows. Warlords who had been kept in check by human peacekeepers started building their empires, and at the edge of the galaxy, in the cold void between stars, something ancient and hungry began to stir. The Valkyrie swarm had been defeated 30 years ago, beaten back by human fleets at a cost of millions of lives. And the survivors had retreated into the darkness to lick their wounds and breed new armies. Now they were ready to return. Scout ships from a dozen species detected the first Valkyrie bioships emerging from deep space, and the reports they sent back filled the Concord with terror. There were billions of them. The swarm was larger than it had ever been, larger than anyone had imagined possible, and it was moving toward the populated regions of the galaxy with the slow, inevitable certainty of a rising tide. Grand Arbiter Vale Soreth stared at the tactical projections and felt real fear for the first time in his long life. Send another message to human space, he ordered. Tell them about the swarm. Tell them we need their help. The message was sent once again. No response. Camavel Soreth slammed his fists against his throne in frustration. They cannot ignore this. The swarm threatens everyone, including them. Kelvorax studied the intelligence reports with his many eyes. Grand Arbiter, our analysts believe the humans are aware of the swarm's movements. Our spies detected human reconnaissance drones near the swarm's location weeks ago. Then why do they not respond? Kelvorax chose his next words carefully. Perhaps they have decided that the galaxy's problems are no longer their concern. Perhaps they are content to let us face the consequences of how we treated them. The Grand Arbiter fell silent, and for the first time he began to wonder if the humans would ever return, and if they did not, what would become of them all? The unraveling came faster than anyone had predicted, like a rope that had been fraying for centuries finally snapping under the weight of its own tension. The Kethra Dominion struck first. For 300 years they had watched humans patrol the borders between their territory and the Vishan Compact, and for 300 years they had hated every moment of it. The Kethra were warriors, bred for conquest, hungry for expansion, and only the threat of human intervention had kept them from devouring their weaker neighbors. Now that threat was gone, the invasion fleet launched without warning. 1,000 warships descending on Vishan colonies like wolves upon sheep, and the screams of the dying echoed across communication channels that no one could answer. The Vishan Compact begged the Concord for help. Grand Arbiter Val Soreth assembled a peacekeeping fleet from a dozen species, the largest non-human military force in galactic history, and sent it to stop the Kethra advance. The battle lasted 6 days. When it was over, the peacekeeping fleet was scattered debris floating through the void, and the Kethra were still advancing. The problem was simple and terrible. No one had ever learned how to fight like humans for 300 years. Every species in the Concord had relied on humanity to do the actual fighting, to develop the tactics, to take the risks, to pay the price in blood and fire. Other species had militaries. Yes, but they were ceremonial forces, parade armies, collections of ships and soldiers who had never faced a real enemy. Because the humans always faced the enemy first, the Kethra had studied human tactics for centuries. But they had never been able to defeat human fleets in direct combat. Other species had not even bothered to study. And now they were paying for their complacency with their lives. The Deshan homeworld fell 2 months later, and 50 billion Deshans became subjects of the Kethra dominion overnight. But the military collapse was only the beginning. The economic crisis deepened with every passing week as worlds that had depended on human trade networks struggled to survive. The Volari species had built their entire civilization around processing rare minerals from human-controlled asteroid fields. And without access to those minerals, their factories went silent and their people went hungry. The Methane Collective had relied on human-designed atmospheric processors to keep their worlds habitable. And without replacement parts, their air was slowly becoming poison to silicon mines. Artificial intelligences who had once threatened organic life before humans defeated them and negotiated their peaceful integration into galactic society, found themselves without the human mediators who had vouched for their behavior. And other species began treating them with fear and hostility once again. Everywhere the same pattern repeated. Something that had seemed stable and permanent was revealed to have been standing on a foundation of human effort. And without that foundation, everything crumbled. And then the plagues began. Humanity had always been the galaxy's doctors. The ones who studied alien biology and developed cures for diseases that threatened extinction. The ones who maintained the quarantine networks and tracked the spread of contagions across the stars without human medical researchers. Old diseases that had been controlled for centuries began to spread again. The Vishan refugees fleeing Kethra occupation carried a sleeping virus in their blood, a virus that human scientists had suppressed decades ago. And when it awakened, it killed millions before anyone understood what was happening. The Volari mining colonies suffered an outbreak of crystal lung disease, a condition that human doctors had learned to treat, but that no other species had ever bothered to study. The Concord's medical infrastructure collapsed under the weight of crises it had never prepared for, and the dying piled up in hospitals that could not help them. Grand Arbiter Val Sorath called emergency session after emergency session, but every meeting ended the same way, with arguments and accusations and no solutions. The humans caused this. One representative would shout, "The humans abandoned us." Another would cry, "We must force them to return." A third would demand, but no one could explain how to force a species that had already proven it could survive alone. A species that had built 2/3 of the galaxy's infrastructure. A species that controlled technology no one else could replicate. Some representative suggested diplomacy, offering the humans whatever they wanted in exchange for their return. Others suggested threats, building a fleet to invade human space and compel their cooperation. The diplomacy failed because every message to humanity went unanswered. Threats failed because every military analyst who studied the human defensive network concluded that invading human space would be suicide. The automated platforms alone could destroy any fleet the Concord could assemble. And behind those platforms were human warships crewed by soldiers who had never lost a war. And while the Concord argued, the Valkyrie swarm drew closer. The first swarm scout vessels reached the outer colonies 6 months after the humans withdrew. And the destruction they wrought was beyond imagination. The Valkyrie were not conquerors like the Kethra. They did not want slaves or territory or resources. They were hunger given form. A biological weapon that consumed everything in its path and left nothing behind but silence and dust. A single swarm bioship could strip a moon bare of all organic matter in a week. A swarm fleet could devour a populated planet in a month, and the main swarm was billions of bioships. Strong species that had spent centuries feeling superior to humanity suddenly found themselves praying to gods they had forgotten. begging for salvation from a threat they could not comprehend. The irony was not lost on anyone. For 300 years, humans had been the ones who stood between the galaxy and the swarm. The ones who developed the weapons that could hurt the bioships. The ones who were willing to fly into that hungry darkness and somehow return alive. Now the swarm was coming. And humanity was not there to stop it. Admiral Calvorax, who had been promoted to commander of the Concorde's remaining military forces, stood before the assembly and delivered his report in a voice that trembled despite his best efforts to control it. The swarm will reach the core worlds in approximately 8 months, he said. Our projections indicate that current Concorde forces can delay them for perhaps 2 weeks. After that, there will be nothing between the swarm and the population centers of 4,000 species. What about our defenses? Someone asked desperately. Our defenses were designed to support human operations, Calvorax admitted. Without human tactical coordination, without human weapons technology, without human soldiers willing to make the sacrifices necessary to hold the line, our defenses are inadequate. Then we must convince the humans to return. Valsorth declared, "We have tried," Calvorax replied. "Every attempt at communication has failed. They do not respond to messages. They do not allow ships to enter their space. They have closed themselves off completely." The assembly fell into hopeless silence. Then, a young representative from a minor species stood up. A creature whose name Valsorth could not even remember. From a world that had no power and no influence in galactic affairs. If messages fail, the young one said, perhaps we should go to them in person. Perhaps we should send a delegation to the human border and ask to speak with them face to face. Valsorth started to dismiss the idea. But something stopped him for the first time in his long life. The Grand Arbiter was out of options. Assemble a delegation, he ordered. The finest diplomats from every major species, carrying the most generous offers we can make, and send them to beg humanity for help. He paused, tasting the bitterness of the words he was about to speak. We have no pride left to lose. The diplomatic vessel approached the human border with all weapons deactivated and all shields lowered, broadcasting signals of peace on every frequency. Ambassador Cal Thorne of the Vishan Compact stood at the viewport and watched the automated defense platforms tracking their approach. And he could feel the targeting systems locked onto his ship like the eyes of predators watching prey. He had been chosen to lead the delegation because his people had suffered the most since humanity's departure. Because the Kethra occupation had taught the Veshans a brutal lesson about the value of human protection. Beside him stood representatives from 47 other species. The finest diplomats the Concorde could assemble, carrying gifts and treaties and promises that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. They are hailing us. The ship's captain announced. The Thurin straightened his posture and prepared to speak. But the voice that came through the communication system was cold and mechanical. Unknown vessel. You are approaching United Human Confederacy territory. State your purpose. We are a diplomatic delegation from the Galactic Concorde, Calthorne replied. We request permission to enter human space and speak with your government. There was a long pause. For what purpose? The voice asked. Coloran swallowed his pride and spoke the truth. We wish to apologize for our treatment of humanity. And we wish to ask for your help. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the voice spoke again. One vessel will be permitted to proceed. Follow the beacon to the designated coordinates. Any deviation from the approved course will result in immediate destruction. The defense platforms parted, just enough to allow the diplomatic ship through. And Calthorne felt like a small animal walking into the den of something vast and dangerous. The journey through human space took 3 days. And what the delegation saw through their viewports left them stunned into silence. They had expected to find humanity struggling, isolated, perhaps even desperate, and Instead, they found paradise human colonies that had been damaged in the Drath incursion were now rebuilt. Not just restored, but transformed into cities of gleaming towers and green gardens. Human shipyards that had once produced warships for the Concord's defense were now building exploration vessels. Science platforms, generation ships designed to carry human civilization to other galaxies. Entirely human children played in parks beneath artificial suns, laughing and running with the carefree joy of a people who no longer carried the burden of protecting an ungrateful universe. "How is this possible?" whispered one of the delegates. "They've only been isolated for 3 years. How could they have advanced so far in such a short time?" Kelthorn understood, and the understanding filled him with shame. "For 300 years, they gave everything to us," he said quietly. "Their resources, their scientists, their soldiers, their children. Everything went to protecting the galaxy instead of building their own civilization." He gestured at the thriving world outside the viewport. "This is what humanity can do when they are free to focus on themselves. This is what we stole from them for 3 centuries. The diplomatic ship landed at a station orbiting Earth itself, and the delegates were escorted through corridors filled with art and light and the quiet hum of technology. More advanced than anything the Concorde possessed, they were brought to a conference room where a single human woman waited for. The Admiral Chen Weilin was old now, her hair white as snow, her face lined with the weight of years and decisions. But her eyes were sharp and clear and utterly without mercy. "You wanted to speak with us," she said. "Speak." Kelthorn stepped forward and bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that his people had never offered to any other species. "Admiral Chen," he began, "on behalf of the Galactic Concorde, I offer our most sincere apologies for the way humanity has been treated. We were arrogant and ungrateful. We took your sacrifices for granted. We dismissed your suffering as unimportant." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "We were wrong. We were so terribly wrong. And we are here to beg for your forgiveness and your help." Admiral Chen listened without expression. "The Valkyrie swarm is coming," Kelthorin continued desperately. "Billions of bioships, more than we have ever seen. Our forces cannot stop them. Our defenses will not hold. Without human help, we will all die." "Yes," Admiral Chen agreed calmly. "You will." The delegates exchanged horrified glances. "You know?" Kelthorn asked. "You have been watching?" "We have been monitoring everything since we closed our borders," Admiral Chen confirmed. "We know about the Kethras invasion. We know about the economic collapse. We know about the plagues. And yes, we know about the swarm. Then why have you not responded to our calls for help?" One of the other delegates demanded. Admiral Chen turned her cold gaze on the speaker. "Why should we?" The question hung in the air like a blade. "For 300 years we answered every call," Admiral Chen said. "We came when the Valkyrie threatened your worlds. We came when the Nexus Mind enslaved your people. We came when the Drath burned your colonies. And every time we saved you, every time we bled for you, you rewarded us with contempt." She stood and walked to the viewport, looking down at the blue-green sphere of Earth below. "Do you know what we learned during those 300 years?" she asked. "We learned that no matter how much we sacrificed, you would never see us as equals. You would never thank us. You would never respect us. You would only demand more. We have changed." Kelthorn insisted. "We understand now what we lost when we lost you." "You understand because you are afraid," Admiral Chen replied without turning around. "You understand because the swarm is coming and you have no one else to turn to. That is not wisdom, that is desperation. Does it matter why we have changed?" Kelthorn pleaded. "Does it matter how we learned our lesson, if we have truly learned it?" Admiral Chen was silent for a long moment. Then she turned back to face the delegation, and her expression had softened just slightly. "Perhaps not," she admitted. "Perhaps the reason matters less than the result. She walked back to her seat and sat down. "I will be honest with you," she said. "When we withdrew, many humans wanted to let the galaxy burn. They wanted you to suffer the consequences of your choices. They wanted you to die knowing that you had driven away the only ones who could save you." The delegates said nothing, but others argued that we should not become like you, Admiral Chun continued. They said that punishing the innocent for the crimes of the guilty was beneath us. They said that our compassion was our strength, not our weakness. "We had many debates," she said. "We argued for years about what to do if this moment came. If you finally came to us on your knees begging for the help you had always scorned." She paused. "In the end, we decided that we are still human. We cannot watch billions die if we have the power to save them. Even billions who would not have saved us." Hope flickered in Kelthorn's hearts. "You will help us?" "Perhaps," Admiral Chun said. "But not as your servants, not as your attack dogs. Not as useful savages to be pointed at your enemies and then discarded when the fighting is done." She leaned forward, and her eyes were hard as steel. "If we return as equals, with full voice in the Concord, with full rights under galactic law, with full recognition of everything we have sacrificed, there will be a new treaty. And this time, humanity will not be the only ones making concessions. We will agree to anything." Kelthorn said quickly. "No," Admiral Chun replied. "You will not agree to anything. You will agree to specific terms that my government has already drafted. And you will honor those terms not because you are desperate, but because they are just—" She slid a data crystal across the table. "Take this back to your Concord," she said. "Show them what we require, and if they truly understand what they did wrong, they will accept." Kelthorn took the crystal with trembling hands. "And if they do not accept?" Admiral Chun's expression did not change. "Then the galaxy will face the swarm alone. And whatever survives will remember that humanity offered them a second chance, and they were too proud to take it." The delegation returned to the Concord capital with the human demands, and the assembly gathered to hear the terms when they were read aloud. There was outcry and protest and anger. The humans wanted too much. Some said the humans were taking advantage of their desperation. Others complained, but Kelthorn stood before them all and spoke with the voice of a species that had already lost everything. "The humans could have asked for our complete surrender," he said. "They could have demanded that we become their subjects. They could have ignored our pleas entirely and let us die." He held up the data crystal. "Instead, they asked only for equality, only for the respect they always deserved, only for the chance to stand beside us instead of beneath us." He looked around the assembly at the frightened faces of 4,000 species. "Is that really too much to pay for our survival?" The vote was called and the galaxy held its breath. The vote was unanimous for the first time in the history of the Galactic Concord. Every species, every world, every representative voted together without a single dissent. The human terms were accepted. Completely Ambassador Kelthorn transmitted the results to human space and waited with the rest of the galaxy for a response. It came not as a message, but as a broadcast, transmitted on every frequency to every world and every station and every ship in the known universe. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka appeared on screens across the galaxy, older now than she had been when she stood before the assembly begging for aid that never came. But there was no weakness in her eyes and no bitterness in her voice. "People of the Galactic Concord," she began, "for 300 years, humanity served as your protectors. Your healers, your builders, your defenders. We gave everything we had. And in return, we received only contempt across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched in silence. 3 years ago, we decided that enough was enough. We closed our borders and turned our attention inward. And we discovered something remarkable. We did not need you to be happy. We did not need your approval to thrive. We did not need to sacrifice ourselves for those who would not sacrifice for us. She paused. But you needed us. And now you have admitted it. And now you have offered us something we never received before. Respect. Yuki allowed herself a small smile. So we will return. Our fleets are already moving. Our soldiers are already preparing. And the Velthari swarm will break against us, as it always has. Her expression hardened. But understand this. We do not return as your servants. We return as your equals. The old Concord is dead. And what rises from its ashes will be a true partnership. One where every species carries its share of the burden. One where no one people is expected to bleed while others prosper. She leaned forward. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is your one chance to prove that you have truly learned from your mistakes. The humans are coming to save you, but this time, you will remember to say thank you. The transmission ended and then the human fleets appeared. They emerged from warp space in a tide of steel and fire. 10,000 warships painted in the colors of Earth, carrying soldiers who had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of the flagship Victory and watched the tactical display light up with the positions of the Velthari swarm, the bioships numbered in the billions. A living storm of hunger that had already consumed a dozen worlds on its march toward the core of the galaxy. Admiral, her tactical officer reported. The swarm outnumbers us approximately 50 to 1. Chen smiled grimly. Then, it is a fair fight. The human fleet advanced. For 9 days the battle raged across 1,000 light years. And the galaxy watched in awe as humanity fought with a fury and skill that no other species could match. Human pilots flew their fighters into the heart of swarm hive ships and detonated there. Reactors from within human marines boarded bioships and fought. The Velthari hand-to-hand in corridors of living flesh. Human scientists deployed weapons that had been developed in secret during the years of isolation. Weapons that turned the swarm's own biology against itself. Weapons that made the bioships consume themselves from within. The swarm fought back with all the mindless hunger of 1 billion years of evolution. But hunger alone was not enough. On the 6th day, the swarm's central hive mind fell to a surgical strike by human special forces. And the billions of bioships lost their coordination on the 8th day. The last swarm breeding cluster was destroyed, ending the threat of future generations. On the 9th day, the final Velthari bioship was hunted down and killed in the cold space between galaxies. And on the 10th day, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood before the assembled fleets of both humanity and the Concord and declared the war over. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen on 1,000 worlds. Species that had never even met humans cheered and wept and danced in the streets. And for the first time in 300 years, those cheers included the word, "Thank you." The new Galactic Concord was formed in the weeks that followed, with humanity taking its rightful place as an equal partner in galactic governance. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka became the first human to sit on the High Council, the first to have a vote that carried the same weight as any other species. President James Okonkwo, who had given the order to withdraw. Lived just long enough to see his people recognized as equals before passing peacefully in his sleep. His last words were simple. We did it. We finally did it. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin retired from military service and spent her remaining years writing her memoirs, a book that would become required reading in schools across the galaxy. They asked us why we returned. She wrote in the final chapter, "After everything they did to us, after all the contempt and the ingratitude and the suffering, they wanted to know why we came back. The answer was simple. Because someone had to, and if not us, who? That is the human burden. We cannot turn away from those who need us, even when they have given us every reason to abandon them. We cannot let the innocent suffer when we have the power to help. Some call it foolishness. Others call it weakness. But I call it our greatest strength. We are humanity. We walked away because we had to, and we came back because that is who we are. Years passed, and the galaxy healed. The Kethra Dominion was forced to release the Deshan worlds, and peace treaties were signed that would hold for generations. The economic networks were rebuilt, this time with fair terms for all species, including humanity. The plagues were cured, the pirates were defeated, the warlords were brought to justice, and slowly, gradually, the way the galaxy thought about humanity began to change. Children grew up hearing stories of human heroes, not as attack dogs or useful savages, but as the ones who had walked away from an ungrateful galaxy and chosen to walk back. Schools taught the history of the withdrawal, not as a tale of human pride or alien foolishness, but as a lesson in the importance of treating others with respect. And when threats arose, as threats always do, the response was no longer "send the humans," but rather, "what can we do together?" Ambassador Yuki Tanaka served on the High Council for 20 years before her own retirement. And on her last day, she stood before the assembly one final time. "When I first came to this chamber," she said, "I came as a beggar, asking for scraps of compassion from species who saw my people as beneath them." She smiled at the representatives who filled the chamber, beings of 4,000 species who now looked at her with respect instead of contempt. "Today I leave as an equal, as a partner, as a friend, and I leave knowing that the galaxy is a better place than it was when I arrived." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears she did not try to hide. Humanity walked away once, and the galaxy realized it was doomed, but we came back. And together we built something better than either of us could have built alone. Remember that. In the years to come, remember that no species, no matter how powerful, can carry the burden of the galaxy alone. Remember that respect and gratitude are not signs of weakness, but the foundation of true strength. She bowed to the assembly, the same bow of respect that her people had once been denied, and this time, the assembly bowed back. The stars had never been kind to humanity, but humanity had learned to be kind to the stars anyway, and in the end, the stars had learned to be kind in return. That was the human legacy. Not the battles won or the empires built, but the simple truth that compassion, even when it was not deserved, had the power to change everything. And somewhere out there, among the infinite darkness between galaxies, the children of Earth looked up at the light of 1,000,000,000,000 suns and smiled, because they knew that as long as humanity existed, the galaxy would never face the darkness alone, not ever again.